What were the laws given to Adam? Many people question the laws given to Adam. We can have many, among them not to eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, if we feed with fruits and vegetables and cereals, marry the woman. This is before sin. We must understand that the Bible does not count all the things that have happened, but rather selects what it considers important. For example, the sexual rules of how to have a child, but of course they existed. The idea of a God who creates and runs away is not accepted, for it is seen that God walked in the garden when Adam hid. And they heard the voice of the Lord God, that walked in the garden in the course of the day, and Adam and his wife hid from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. And there is an intimacy between Adam and God, seeing that merely by the voice Adam already discerned that God was there, and went to hide. We still observe the idea that God walked the afternoon, which shows that there was indeed a connection. Now what would God speak to Adam? Of course things Adam did not know, and advice from the most varied. This is because if you read the Bible, it is notorious that God does so naturally. Knowing that it is the same God, then we see that God always defines rules and advice, as there was no sin, so God would not define curses as they occur in later writings, but of course God would define several consequences for various actions. And Cain spake with Abel his brother, and it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother, and slew him. For example, how would they know that killing is wrong if they had not spoken? It is extremely childish to imagine that if it had not been written it did not occur, or to say that if it did not occur it is not known what it is. For example, on the back. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat thereof, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. But in that period there was no death, and where does it say before that God explained what death was? Why did God say something they did not know? So could you think this was good? How did they know it was bad? Where was it said? Now people who seek ignorance in thinking, raise childish objections. Indeed, reading the biblical texts, if they see that God always defines right and wrong, and sets standards, is something of the nature of God. A good reader of the Bible can see that God is normative in nature. A good biblical reading, and if one can see the standard ways of God, God does not present himself as an individual who is surprised. He is schematic and constant. And we can still prove this with the verse. For Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my precepts, my statutes, and my laws. Here we have warrants, precepts, statutes and laws. But if you look at the previous texts, do not commit what they are, but they were given. That is, not everything that was determined as a norm needed to be written before, but one thing is certain: the norms are the same, since what God determines is for good. For example, it is determined that God created the laws of the universe. Did they change? Of course not. Now one thing is certain: if man errs he needs rules to aid, and these norms are not ideal. For example, what is the ideal in human food according to the Bible? And God said, Behold, I have given unto you every herb yielding seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree wherein is fruit of a tree that bringeth forth seed, they shall be for food. This is the ideal food for the human being in its creation. But after making the mistake, the man received another order. Thorns and thistles also shall bring forth thee, and you shall eat the grass of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return to the land, because thou hast been taken from it, because thou art dust, and thou shalt return to dust. Now he receives the concept of eating grass from the field, But the ideal food is not grass of the field, this occurs as a consequence. Then there is the flood, and again, all that moves, which is living, shall be for your meat. I have given you all things like green grass. But it remains the ideal food before sin. Again, such are consequences. We can observe this almost 4,000 years later. And a voice was heard unto him, Arise, Peter. Kill and eat. But Peter said, Not at all, Lord, for I have never eaten anything common and unclean. We have to eat the meat, being ordinary and filthy was not the perfect. If we go back almost 1,000 years before, we will. And Daniel said unto the steward, whom the prince of the eunuchs had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Give thy servants 10 days' sake, that they may give us vegetables to eat, and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the portion of the king's food be seen before thee, and as thou sayest, be thou with thy servants. And he dealt in this, and tested them 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days their countenance seemed better, they were fatter than all the young men who ate portion of the king's food. Which shows that correct without error is always better. In other words, the best is always the ideal. Therefore to him that knoweth to do good, and doeth it not, to him it is sin. So we have that the original laws remain. Now when the man puts himself in situations with no eggs, there is necessary the less worse. And the less worst is never the ideal, it is merely a palliative. In fact, many people, seeing a palliative, define that the palliative is the ideal. This is because the taste of the individual is not towards the best, but the closest to their wills. In fact, it's merely an excuse not to go in the right direction. Thus the laws given to Adam are the same as those given to every man. In fact, we have such terms in the Bible. And he said unto them, The Sabbath was made for man, and not man, because of the Sabbath. So kill, steal, covet, and all the standards of this group are for men, and such were given to Adam.